California branch of the Eagle Forum. Please give a big welcome for Orlean Koehle.
Thank you very much, Mary, and thank you for picking me up. And do I need the loudspeaker?
Maybe.
I don't know, whatever this is, microphone.
Yeah, I think you have to strain your voice.
We're both a little scattered.
Yes,
I bet.
Just while he's getting this set up, and what is your nice name?
John.
Oh, John is getting this ready for me. And the PowerPoint is right here. Anyway, we were 45 minutes away, and suddenly the car started making funny noises, like there was something rattling in the engine, and then louder noises, and then it felt like something fell out of the car underneath. Maybe that was my engine. And so we quickly pulled over to the side, and then steam was coming out of the engine, out of the hood, and we jumped out. There was a fire already on the grass. We stomped that out, and fortunately the truck stopped right after us with the fire extinguisher because there was a fire under our car. And so we are not quite sure what dropped out of the engine, what was going on, but we think what happened, it got so hot that the little screw thing on top of the oil burst because there was oil all over, and it must have been an oil fire. And anyway, so the car is now being towed, and this nice friend that I drove with stayed back with the tow truck, and hopefully there was another nice man that stopped, and he said he would be happy to bring her with his wife to Chico when this is all taken care of. So you have the nicest people who live here. There were actually 3 people who stopped, and were so kind. And so we've been praying hard, and hopefully she's going to make it a little better. But I'd like to thank Mary for this invitation and arranging it, and for all of you being here. And may I ask, are there any former teachers with us? And are there any present teachers with us? Wonderful. Any school board members or superintendents?
I was a school board member.
Oh, good.
School board member.
Well, I really appreciate those of you who are here, who are teachers and former teachers. I have great respect for teachers. I was a teacher. My mother was a teacher and a principal. My daughter is a teacher, and my daughter-in-law. So we're surrounded by educators. And the reason I became so curious about Common Core, it was wonderful. You did this. He does this better than I do. Okay, great. I was in Utah a year ago, in July, and Utah was kind of chosen as a pilot program to try Common Core out before anyone else. So they've had it for a whole year. And there was a group that organized there to fight it called Utahns Against Common Core, 3 Moms Against Common Core, and if you go to their website, you'll find amazing information. I was asked to speak about another book that I was writing about, Agenda 21, and met these 3 moms, and they were there in the audience, and they said, you know, we think that, can I just do something?
I think if it's too far away from your mouth, it's right. So
We think that Common Core is how they're going to be spreading Agenda 21 throughout the world. So that really intrigued me, and I started doing more and more research, and I discovered, you know, no one has written anything about this hardly. So I wrote a book, and the book was published last December. The fastest book I've ever written in my life because I felt, you know, people need this information and they need it quickly. So the name of my book is Common Core, A Trojan Horse for Education Reform, and I gave it that title, and I'm not doing very well moving this. I think it likes you.
So do we.
All right, great. Thank you. And I chose that title because the Trojan Horse has become a symbol of deception over the years. And I really think we are being deceived because they're saying that Common Core is a state standards initiative. They're saying that it was state-written, state-led. That is not true. And if you ask any single state, can you tell us who the people are who wrote this in your state? They can't give you any names, but they continue to say that it is state-led, state-written, state-driven, and I'm saying, no, this is not true. This is big top-down federal being pushed upon us. And they did it very sneakily. They say that it is voluntary. I read the article that just came out in your paper. Again, they said that this was voluntary, that the states were able to volunteer to sign on. The states were coerced, and I'm going to tell you how that happened. It still doesn't like me. Maybe I just need you. Would you just like to sit here with us?
Just a point, and
All right.
I'll shoot.
Okay. Thank you very much. As a former journalism teacher, I love to cover all of those 5 W's and 1 H. So you're going to hear what is Common Core, what states signed on to it, where did it originate, who are its creators, why was it created, why have we heard so little about it, does it really improve standards or make them lowered, why is opposition mounting, when do the governors of the 46 states sign on to it, when is it to be fully implemented, how is it to be implemented and paid for? We're going to cover all that territory tonight. I suffer from an illness called TMI, which stands for too much information. So I will try to skip through some things and zero in on others. We're going to be told that Common Core, this is the mantra everyone is saying, is that before we used to have education a mile wide and an inch deep. Now we're going to have education a mile deep and an inch wide. You've probably heard that mantra. Well, I'm going to try to go a mile deep into Common Core and do it as quickly as I can, but there's just so much to this, it's just mind-boggling. Okay. This is the logo they have. As you see, the lovely 46 states that signed on get to be depicted in yellow. The dull brown states that were not as enlightened are depicted in brown. And in the middle of it is Nebraska. They said no. Texas, Alaska, Virginia, and part of Minnesota. Minnesota accepted the English part, but not the math. And as you see, they say that Common Core is a digital learning program to be used to create commonality of curriculum in all of the states that signed on. 46 states plus the District of Columbia, they all signed on in 2010. And the 4 C's that they love to promote Common Core: communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. And I am saying that when this is fully implemented, none of those will be really happening because a teacher's creativity will not be possible. How can they be creative when there has to be commonality among all the states? And so I say there are these hidden C's of Common Core: total central control, commonality, they use that one as well. And what does commonality mean? It means they're trying to say that this is good, that you go from California to Arizona, your child will not miss a single day of the same curriculum because this is all coming from computers and everything will be just the same, and you think how wonderful that is. Have we ever had commonality in education before? We have had competition. And if one school district was not doing as well as another, parents would tend to take their children out, put them in the better school district, and that would cause the lower performing school district to raise their standards and try to work better and work harder. When you have commonality, it just lowers standards. There's no one school that is achieving more than another. So commonality has never been the tradition of America. And then continuality, once this is totally implemented, it will be continued. And that's their goal, they want it to be continued. One of the things the teachers are being told, you must teach with constructivism. Constructivism means the child constructs their own meaning, constructs their own truth. The teacher is just someone that kind of is there as the facilitator. The teacher is not even supposed to give them guidance and let them know what they're doing. In fact, in the newspaper article today, that's what this teacher said, that he's supposed to be behind the scenes. The children are to construct their own meaning. So constructivism is a big part of Common Core. And then what is so amazing, and I wish I had all my materials to show you, but part of it is still in that suitcase and I didn't have time to go get it all, but my daughter-in-law, who teaches the 3rd grade in the San Diego area, gave me her teacher training manual that she was given in Common Core. And one of the things that I noticed was it is no longer the individual child that you are teaching. The teacher is teaching the collective, the entire classroom. And a child cannot progress on his own level. Everyone has to be the same. So it's really the collective versus the individual. And that is not the tradition of America either. We used to have the individual could progress at whatever level they wanted to. Now they're all held together, this commonality. It says reminder, my computer's not You want to get rid of it? That'd be nice. Thank you. I was speaking last October in Santa Cruz, and a professor from Sacramento State by the name of Dave Scanlon heard me. Like a nice professor, he created his own yes and no questions about Common Core. And I thought this was so good, I asked his permission to include it in my slides. So, if Common Core were truly a state standards initiative, would it not have originated with the individual states, with input and control over content and standards from state legislators, state school boards, local parents, teachers, and local school boards? So then we asked these yes and no questions. Did state legislators have any input and control over the content, standards, tests, and costs? What about state school boards, parents, teachers, local school boards? Did the local school board call a general meeting for parents to explain the Common Core curriculum and costs before the program was adopted? Did experimental research support the effectiveness of Common Core content and standards and digital learning with computers? And the answer to that is no, 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 no. So obviously, this cannot really be called a state standards initiative. Let's skip this one. Why have we heard so little about Common Core? Obama was very, very wise. He already had the stimulus money, so he didn't have to go to Congress and say, Congress, we need more money for a new education program that I'm starting. He just bypassed Congress. He went straight to the governors and he said, I know you're all strapped for money. I'm offering you the possibility of applying for a grant. It's going to be $4.35 billion. We're going to divide this up among the winning states, so it's a competition basis. And that appealed to the governors. Everyone likes a little competition, except for Common Core. They have to have commonality. So the governors applied for this, but it was during the time that the state legislators were not in session. So they couldn't go to their state legislators and say, we need your approval. They just went to their state school boards. They also had only a 2-month window of opportunity to do this. So therefore, they really didn't have any opportunity for the state legislators to meet and come up with any decision on it. So that's why the state legislators were bypassed as well. And the governors thought this was kind of a badge of honor if they won. These were the incentives to get them to compete for this money. First of all, they not only they would win this money, and this was a big incentive, but they would get a waiver to get out of No Child Left Behind, and nobody liked No Child Left Behind. I don't like it. Teachers don't like it. The governors didn't like it. And next year, this was a horrible year, 2014, when all of the governors had to have 100% meeting these standards by all the children. Well, you can't do that because all of our children are different. So they knew they wouldn't be able to do that, so they wanted this waiver. So that was a really big incentive. And thirdly, there was a threat that if they did not go along with Common Core standards, they would lose their Title I money. Title I money is what they use to pay for their underprivileged children, free lunches, free breakfast. as well as special ed. So of course they couldn't possibly lose that. And over the entire nation, it's $14.5 billion. And every state needs that. So those were the incentives, and this was not voluntary, they were coerced into signing on. Then if the school districts themselves wanted to compete, they had another opportunity for them. It was called Race to the Top -D. Some of us call it Race to the Trough, because there's always this big carrot hanging over their heads, the money that is behind all of this. So as of September 2012, 893 school districts had already applied for this Race to the Top money for them individually, even though only 15 to 20 were going to win any money. And some of those districts were in states where they had actually said no to Common Core. That's very interesting, isn't it? This was the criteria on which the rewards were given, and there were 11 states that won. They had to be willing to do 4 things: adopt Common Core standards sight unseen, build data system on students, teachers, and principals with constant evaluations. And this is a really scary part about Common Core, and I'm going to go into that much deeper, because this is, to me, something that is very frightening. Data collection on not only students, but you'll also be finding about their families, and the teachers, and the principals, and the administrators. Then thirdly, they had to be willing to recruit, develop, reward, and retain effective teachers and principals, and they do that by having the teachers' salaries tied to the test scores. So if the students don't do well on their tests, the teacher salaries go down. And lastly, they had to be willing to turn around the lowest performing schools, or willing to start charter schools. And wasn't it interesting to find out that they actually got more points if they had more charter schools in their states than regular public schools. So that made people begin to think, maybe that's what this is all about. If you have top-down socialist education, you don't want public schools that have representative government governing them. You want something like Germany, where there is no school board attached to their schools. It is total top-down, big government education. And the reason we found this out, a good friend of mine in Tennessee is the one that let me know in Tennessee that did win, as you see, they won $300 to $500 million. They got more points in Tennessee for having more charter schools than public schools. So just keep that in the back of your head, because that is just really amazing information. Yes?
I was under the impression that charter schools are pretty much run by the parents and so forth, not the local school board.
Exactly. So it's education without representation.
Oh, in other words, these charter schools then get money, but they have their representation is taken away.
Exactly. They get tax-paying dollars funding them, but they don't have a school board over them. So it's education without representation. And if the parents don't like what is going on, maybe it's a good Christian charter school, maybe they do have a good board that will listen to them, but often that is not the case. And I'll let you know that I truly believe that Common Core is about taking away this representation. Just as they took away the representation of Congress, they took away the representation of state legislators, and most of the school boards were clueless about Common Core. They knew nothing about it until it was being forced upon them. So the states that did not win the money, could they just now say, sorry, we don't want to participate anymore? No, they were already locked in, and they have to come up with the money themselves. California has to come up with $1.6 billion all on their own. And does California have that much money? Not really. But so what's amazing is Jerry Brown suddenly said we have a surplus of $2 billion, and part of that is going to go towards education. And you wonder where he got that. But this is the huge cost: $800 million for curriculum, $765 million for teacher training, $20 million for principal training, plus assorted minor costs. And then the huge cost of computers coming in, because part of Common Core is every child is supposed to have their own computer. There will be no more textbooks. Everything will be done with ebooks and total online learning. So that is why it's so expensive. And we have the estimated cost of the state of Washington was $300 million. Most of the other states are so embarrassed they would not give their estimated costs. It's just too high. And if you don't mind, I'll take all the questions at the end.
That's fine.
Okay. So where did Common Core progressive education originate? How did we get to where we are today? You'd like to blame this all on Obama, but this is not his fault. This is a step-by-step progression that started probably 150 years ago. And it's just that this is now the frosting on the cake, and they are so much farther along than they've ever been before. And I just want to give you some of this because I think it is so important. The traditional education of our nation was what our founding fathers were taught. And most of them were taught at home. They maybe had private tutors or they were just taught by their mothers. And the Bible was the first grade primer, and they had very high literacy rates. This was the traditional education definition, the imparting to the next generation time-honored truths, facts, knowledge, culture, traditions, and morality based on Judeo-Christian principles that will help children live happy, useful, productive lives. Well, what does progressive socialist education do to that? First of all, it totally changes what the definition of education is. It's now parens patria. Children belong to the state, to the community, to the village, to the Führer. And schools are now centralized under a powerful federal government. The purpose is to condition children to think and act alike, to be obedient soldiers and workers, and to no longer think of themselves as individuals, but part of the common good. And there is always a very low literacy rate, and that is by design. These are the people that are most responsible for this progressive education. Horace Mann, Stanley Hull, Edward Thorndike, but I want to zero in on John Dewey. John Dewey is called the father of progressive socialist education. He created the Lab School at the University of Chicago to show how education could create socialists instead of capitalists. He wrote the Humanist Manifesto, brought secular humanism into the public schools, was part of the teacher college at Columbia, where the education mafia was formed. And that was a group of prominent progressives who became the heads of all of the universities and high schools. And they only hired like-minded professors or teachers that had their same philosophy. That is why you wonder, why do we have 90% of our university professors are all very liberal? And in some colleges, it's even more than that. And it's getting the same way in our high schools. And you know, to be a Republican teacher in a high school today, it's kind of scary. You feel like you are an endangered species. And that's kind of how this all happened. And then the other person that's really important is Antonio Gramsci, who was an Italian communist. He was arrested in Italy because Mussolini didn't want him running around giving his philosophy. From the prison cells, he wrote his philosophy and sent it all over the world. And his philosophy was that to spread Marxism, communism, you have to do it slowly, not by some big revolution, but by capturing the schools, the churches, the culture, and the media. And it is amazing how many professors today proudly admit that they are a Marxist. They think that this is a badge of honor. It's just amazing. So when you have a progressive teaching method going on, this is how the classroom changes. The classroom is changed, so the desks are now circles for more social contact. The look-say method of reading is what John Dewey instigated, and this was later called whole language, where children were not taught by phonics, but by memorizing little small words. Do you all remember the Dick and Jane books? That's what it was. You were supposed to memorize these little small words. Look, Dick, run, Jane, see, Scott, jump. My mother taught her 3 daughters how to read before we ever got to the first grade in my little town of Roberts, Idaho. We had no kindergarten. And she taught us mainly through reading the Bible. When I saw Dick and Jane books, I thought, this is reading. It's just the most boring thing I've ever seen. So, and then whole language was just a repeat of that. I became a teacher in California when whole language was going on. I had to go back to Sonoma State to renew my certificate that came from teaching in Idaho. And that I was taught, I had to attend a class teaching in the or reading in the secondary schools. I thought, well, surely they know how to read by then. Whole language had stopped their progression. They did not know how to read in the secondary schools. And we lost a whole generation of children that did not know phonics because of this silly whole language program. Then, in 1962 was the pivotal date when religion was now taken out of the schools. Bible was no longer allowed, prayer was no longer allowed, but this created such a void, and what filled the void? Secular humanism. And now the children, and most of them come out of our schools thinking there is no God, they think they're a product of evolution, there is no absolute truth, no strict moral standards, situational ethics, values clarification that you think sounds so good. Well, it was not Judeo-Christian values they were being taught, they were secular humanist values. Free sex, anything goes, if it feels good, do it. Diversity, acceptance of all lifestyles. Multiculturalism, this is the really big one in our schools now, which is acceptance of all cultures. There is no American exceptionalism. In fact, of all the cultures, America is put down. And our children come out of the schools no longer proud to be Americans. Also, there is a constant picking on whitey. We are the evil ones, and we're blamed for all the ills of the world. Global citizenship is taught. They're not to think of themselves as citizens of any one sovereign nation. Borders should be done away with. And again, there's that constructivism. They construct their own meaning, their own truths. Okay, these are some of the pivotal dates. Let's just skip down to where recent, well, no, we've got to get 1979. This was when the Federal Department of Education was started, and this was done because Jimmy Carter wanted to give a big payback to the NEA. They were the most powerful labor union that brought him into office as president. So this was their reward, this was his promise to them. So the goal of the progressives had finally been achieved, to have a Federal Department of Education, and boy, have things gone downhill since then. In 1990, we started these amazing series of laws that have now led up to what we have now with Common Core. And it doesn't matter if it's a Republican or a Democrat, they all kept pushing us closer to big top-down federal education. So it started with 1990, America 2000. This was George H. Bush's. He had national education goals, standards, curriculum, and tests. 1994, Goals 2000, School to Work under Bill Clinton. This created education business partnerships, changed the purpose of education to just supplying workers for businesses. Assessments were based on attitudes. 1998, the Workforce Investment Act created a nationwide network of boards to manage one-stop work centers. Public schools were now called work centers. So this was following the German system that they had as their goal all along. As you know, in Germany at age 12, my husband is from Germany, they have to take a test called the Abitur that determines if they're going to go on to college or off to a trade school. They get 2 chances to take it, but if they fail it, then they're off to a trade school, whether they really would love to go to college or not. And see, here in America, we always felt that we had freedoms, that we had the right to have our children become whatever they wanted to become. They didn't have to pass this difficult test. And they could, some children are late bloomers, and they don't really know what they want in life till later on, and then they get really motivated and work hard, and we allowed them the freedom to do that. But this is not the way it is anymore. And so this started with the Workforce Investment Act. No Child Left Behind under George Bush Jr. promised to get rid of all of the above, but it didn't. It just put them more firmly into place with more federal controls, evaluations, high-stake testing. That's where the teacher's salary is tied to the test. And then the NAEP test, and the NAEP stands for National Assessment of Education Progress. All states have to take this by federal law. Then, under Obama, we had Race to the Top, and that just offered this wonderful grant money to the states to now push in Common Core. And Common Core will put the states totally under federal control with intrusive data mining, and that data mining is what is going to be used then to determine their career, determine if they can go on to college or not. So we're really back to that German system. We don't have that rigid test at age 12, but teachers are supposed to help gear their students according to either a career or onto college. So what is the ultimate goal of this kind of education and methods? A complete transformation of our society, a new era of civilization, the movement from a national to a global society. This was spoken by Shirley MacCune in 1989. She actually spoke that in Santa Rosa. She came to speak, and these were her remarks that were printed in the newspaper. And she said both formal and non-formal education are, this is from Agenda 21. I meant to show you this large book that I received. A good friend of mine found it lying on top of a garbage can where it probably belonged, but he gave me a copy of it. And on page 293, it says that the whole purpose of education is to change people's attitudes. So they definitely want our little conservative children coming out of our homes to have their big global perspective attitude. And then government is implementing policies that will lead to poverty, not prosperity. Individual choice is narrowed. Individual freedom is subservient to a collective society. This was spoken by Michelle Bachmann when we brought her to Santa Rosa in 2004 to speak for a state Eagle Forum conference. This is when she was still a state senator back in Minnesota. The whole reason why she ran for office was to fight what was going on in the public schools in Minnesota. And she truly believes that education is being deliberately dumbed down and literacy rates are being lowered deliberately. And I forgot to show you that quote by John Dewey back on his page, but he actually firmly believes that to create a good little socialist, you cannot have high literacy rates. You must have children more tied to the collective if they are not good readers. If they're good readers, they'll know about their own history and they'll be able to read their own history and they will be more curious at reading. So if you bring down their literacy rates, then you'll have better socialists and better people who are tied to government control and willing to be controlled. So have things changed any? This is the statement that maybe some of you read by MSNBC host Melissa Harris Perry, spoken April 8th, 2013. We have to break through our private idea that kids belong to their parents or their families and recognize that kids belong to the whole community. Once we realize this, it is everybody's responsibility and not just the households, then we can start making better investments in children and public education. Is that amazing? Okay, so why should we be so concerned about big top-down federal control over our schools? It's actually contrary to our Constitution. The 10th Amendment has always left education up to the individual states. Whatever is not written in the Constitution is to be left to the states. Well, that's not happening with Common Core. And then we have actually 3 federal laws that say there should not be any big top-down federal government. And that's what they essentially say. The Federal Department of Education shall not be involved in developing, supervising, or controlling instructional materials or curriculum. So that's why they have to disguise Common Core as a state standard initiative, to not let you think this really is big top-down federal, because they know they're in violation of these 3 laws. And then I've already mentioned how competition is what makes our nation great, not commonality. And we've always believed that competition should be there to help give people incentives. We also believe that parents are supposed to have something to do with their their children's education and local school boards. The tradition of American federalism is that the best government is that which is closest to the people and truly represents the people. We also believe the best government is that which governs least and allows people to be self-governing. This is a statement by Bill Evers, who is very opposed to Common Core, and he is part of the Hoover Institute at Stanford. He said the insight of competitive federalism is that the 51 state school boards, he included 51 with District of Columbia, are better than a single federal executive branch office, and 15,000 local school boards are better than either 51 state school boards or a single federal office. So don't let your school boards consolidate. The best school board is that which governs closest to the people. When you have like the huge Los Angeles School District, Unified School District, it has 50,000 schools in it. And that is way too many. And one little school doesn't mean anything to them. So that's why you need government that governs least and closest to the people. This is where we talk about the data collection, because this is so scary. There was something that used to be in place called the FERPA law, which stands for Family Education Rights Protection Act. And it was there to protect the rights of children, protect the rights of parents, so that children would not have all this invasive data collected on them. Well, in December 2011, Obama, by executive order, changed this so that we now have open season on data collection on our children. And this includes biometrics, which are fingerprints, retina scans, DNA, health records, blood type, diet, food diaries, how much exercise they have, homework completion, parents' religion, political persuasion, parents' voting record, father's income, functional magnetic resonance imaging, facial decoding cameras, pressure-sensitive computer mice, and a biometric wrap on kids' wrists. And it is just amazing what is happening. You'll go to the next slide. I'll go back. I have two different varieties of this, but if you'll look on this book, and you can Google it, Promoting Grit, Tenacity, and Perseverance, on page 44, it shows you pictures of what they're using as the child is taking their test. So as the child is taking their test, there's a picture of the mouse that he'll be holding, and the mouse will be geared that he will test their stress level. There's a picture of the camera that will be geared, and as you know, most of our computers now have a little camera right there at the top that will be taking pictures of their faces as they're taking the test. And there will also be a wrap, a little band around their wrist that will test their blood pressure. And even the chair that they're sitting in will test their stress levels. And you think, what on earth is going on? If they were using such things to test the tenacity, grit of steel, that would be all right. These are our precious little children. Why would they even be doing such a thing? And what are they going to be using with that data? Who knows, maybe someday when your little child decides, or your grandchild decides, they would like to go on and become a medical doctor. They have all the good grades for it, their science and math, but their test scores were not very good. The stress level as they were taking their tests was just not where they should be. So they'll say, sorry, you cannot go on and become a medical doctor because you didn't do well with your stress levels. Who knows what they're going to be using this for? Some people think they're going to be selling it to the highest bidder. And this data is called longitudinal data, which means it can cross state lines. It's amazing. And there's more and more information that's coming out about this. According to Glenn Beck, there are over 400 points of data. I just named some of them. I can't even think of 400. So it's just astronomical. And this is one of the biggest reasons why I think we should be very opposed to Common Core. And this is really a violation of our Fourth Amendment rights, that we are supposed to have our privacy protected. Okay, what about homeschool kids? Will they have data collected on them as well? You think, oh good, homeschool kids are safe. They don't have to worry about this. Well, according to their own words, This is recommendations from the P through 20, that stands for preschool through age 20, Data Coordinating Council, where the star is, includes student groups not now included, homeschooled in the data system. Most of our homeschool kids are already using computers and doing their work. Well, if they use the computer is already collecting enormous data on them, and who knows where that data is going. In Heber City, I was told by one of these moms that they were not putting the computers into all of the classrooms. It was just the 5th grade that got their computers last year. And that one of the mothers said, well, I would like to purchase my own computer for my son. I said, no, this has to be issued from the school. And she said, why? Well, she found out that the school will be watching the child through the little picture, the camera on the computer, as the child is taking their tests at home or doing their homework. And you wonder, what on earth, what privacy is being violated by this? So there's just so many things to be cautious and leery of. This is Donna Garner. She's a Texas educator and blogger, and this is how she describes how national standards works. You have national standards leading to national assessments, national curriculum, teachers' salaries tied to student test scores, teachers teaching to the test each and every day, national indoctrination of our public school children, national database of students and teachers. So you see how it's all connected. This is what I am very leery about. I believe this is an example of National Socialist education at its worst, Nazism. My husband was born in Germany in 1942, and he grew up under such a system. Even though Hitler was taken out a few years later, they kept the education system. And so this was kind of similar to some of the things that he experienced. There were powerful teacher unions that the majority of teachers belonged to that promoted the new system. Teachers were weeded out who could not accept the new system. The curriculum was rewritten to reflect the new ideology. History was rewritten. There was an anti-intellectual teaching. The standards were dumbed down. There were master teachers to train other teachers, but really they felt they were master spies. Obama has already said that he's going to have 10,000 master teachers, and they're to be out training the others. They will be given their district salary, but they will also be given $20,000 extra for being a master teacher. I was speaking in Lake Arrowhead a few months ago. A teacher there told me she's already had her own personal experience with her master teacher, that a lady was in her classroom for a week taking notes of everything she did. And I guess Lake Arrowhead had already been chosen to be a pilot program, and it was either English or math. And this master teacher was there watching everything she did. If she dared to deviate from the Common Core at all, she could see the lady scribbling really quickly. And what was that data going to be done with? Who did that be turned into? She has no idea. But she really thinks that those master teachers are master spies out watching the teachers. And then, of course, data was collected on the students back under Hitler. Well, now it's really going to be collected. Hitler didn't have computers, so this is going to be so much easier now. And some students, the Hitler's youth, were trained to be spies on teachers and fellow students. This is a picture of a little Hitler Youth boy dressed up in his Hitler Youth uniform. As you see, he's the blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy that Hitler was trying to achieve that Aryan race. This is a popular German magazine called the Frauenwarte back in 1932. And down in the lower left-hand corner, you see Deutschland Jugend gehört dem Führer, which means German youth belong to the Führer. And they were very proud of it. This was, to them, wonderful that their youth belonged to the Führer. And it kind of makes you think when Obama was running for office in 2008 and 2012, you would see YouTube clips of little children singing praises to him, marching in sequence.
Yes.
Just kind of reminded you,
Yes.
is that what they're promoting? So if this were really raising standards, maybe some of it might be worth it. But according to the experts, that is not the case. James Milgram Well, first of all, let's talk about Robert Shepard. He's an author, curriculum designer, textbook publisher, assessment developer. He said the Common Core state standards are poorly designed and regressive. He says they seem to have been slotted at random. You have a combination of apples and oranges and shoelaces into a single standard. He said, but we are stuck with them. We have no choice. That choice has been taken from us. This is what the standard says. This is what you have to teach, whether it makes sense or not. Freedom, innovation, creativity is stifled. A single set of standards hamstrings textbook writers, curriculum designers, and teachers. They are no longer free to create. Someone else has already decided for them what they should be taught and when, what should be taught and when. One has to follow the authoritarian prescription from on high. This mandate stifles innovation in curricular and pedagogical design. This is the math standards. And this is James Milgram. He's a professor emeritus of math at Stanford. He was the only PhD mathematician that was asked to be part of the review committee for Common Core, and he refused to sign off on it. And this is what he said. He said, Common Core is postponing true algebra. They're going to be telling you, oh no, we're teaching algebra in the first grade. Well, true algebra is going to be postponed from the 8th grade to 9th grade, leaving no room for calculus to be taught in high school. Little memorization is asked for, and a confusing form of geometry that was thrown out of the Soviet Union 50 years ago is now being taught. And I keep moving this, and I don't know what happens to this microphone. He said, the key topics of Euclidean geometry, proofs, and deductive reasoning will no longer be taught. And it's geometry that really helps children to be wise and have this good deductive reasoning that will not be there. And he said that the math is really a byproduct of politics, of special interest groups, and they're focused on making the standards as non-challenging as possible. So this is coming from the real authority on math. And then as you see, math is also being used to support social justice. And social justice is running rampant through all of Common Core, every subject. Now we'll talk about language arts. This was my field. And this is Sandra Stotsky. She was also on the review committee for Common Core, and she said the same thing. She refused to sign off on it, and she said that the English language arts are going to be lowered. What used to be 80% English, classical English in elementary is now being lowered to 50% and lowered all the way down to 30% for high school. What will it be replaced with? What they call informational text, so they can read a computer manual. Whatever child has ever gone to bed with a computer manual. And what is so sad is that you are now missing out on some of the great teachings that come from classical English literature. Great works of art. Children are taught in classical English literature good and bad, right and wrong. They're taught morality. They're taught how to make wise decisions, how to be responsible citizens, the value of liberty. Much of Shakespeare won't be taught anymore. And the great teachings that I used to teach my students. To thine own self be true, and it shall follow as the night the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man. Does anyone know where that comes from? That's actually Hamlet. And this was this wise father's advice to his son before he went off to college. Our children aren't even being taught that there is such a thing as truth anymore. So if there is no truth, how can you be true to it? And this was what, her name is Sandra Stotsky, and she's the professor of English at Arkansas. And she has become a real amazing spokesperson against Common Core. Oh, go back one more step. I forgot to give you what Anthony Esselon said. He's a professor at a university in Rhode Island, the Providence College, and he says that he is appalled by what Common Core is doing, that they are essentially thinking that they're programming machines, that our children are just little functionaries, And he says that our children are not robots. They're supposed to be treated as individuals. And that's why he's so appalled by these Common Core standards. And according to some people, this will now lead to lower college standards because they're going to be tying all of the college entrance board exams to Common Core, the SAT, ACT, and even the GED, the high school equivalent. So that will bring down everything. And the education reporter that Phyllis Schlafly puts out says that aligning the SAT with Common Core will likely make the college admission test less strenuous and would in turn lead to lower standards in college. So it's going to dumb down education everywhere. There you are. So, as I mentioned, I don't know what I'm doing, but it keeps fading in and fading out. Oh, okay. While he's doing that, next year, the assessment tests were supposed to be coming in, but they're coming in now, being postponed a year, so 2015. But everything is now being geared to those tests. Thank you. Everything is now being geared to those tests, and they will have all of the standards, the curriculum are going to be geared to those tests. So of course, this is going to be bringing the commonality of Common Core everywhere. The teachers and the school boards are being told, well, it's all right. Every state can bring in 15%, whatever they would like. If you have to teach like California history that's different from the other states, you have 15% to do that. The sad thing is, on the assessment test, none of that will be there. So they're not going to waste much time doing that 15% because it will not be on the big assessment test. This is how I learned about Common Core, from these three moms against Common Core. And they're the ones that really let me know that this is education without representation. That's at the very top of their website because they think this is such an important aspect that we need to know about. And two of them were teachers. Crystal on the far right was a junior college teacher of classical English literature. Renee Brady was an elementary teacher, and Elisa Ellis is the mother of 7 children, so that qualifies her to be part of this group. And they are real dynamos, and they have an amazing website. But they're the ones that also bring in the aspect of the charter schools. So if the charter schools have now lost their representation, because they're just being governed by an appointed board, then this is also education without representation. I would also say that this is taxation without representation. That's what the whole Revolutionary War was fought over. Our school boards are supposed to be now raising bond measures to increase the money. They were told that they had to come up with half the money for Common Core. So they were all talking, how are we going to do this? Well, it was increasing bond measures without representation because they didn't even get a vote on this, and neither did our state legislators. And how are the teachers feeling about this? Most of the teachers who really would like to speak out about it are afraid to because they know this data is being collected on them. And they're being told they can no longer use any of their old files. That's what my daughter-in-law in San Diego was told. She's been teaching for 10 years. If she dared to use any of her old files, did not go totally to Common Core, her job was in jeopardy. And I said, but you're a tenured teacher. How can they tell you that? She said, tenure doesn't mean very much anymore. And then, according to Diane Ravitch, who is also a really good blogger and is highly respected by both sides, both the Democrats and Republicans, she says that there's a maelstrom of pent-up resentment over being forced to do what's wrong for kids and being afraid of losing gainful employment by speaking out. However, there was one brave soul in Rhode Island who wanted to resign because of Common Core. He went to his school board to speak out and resign in front of them. They would not let him speak. So instead, he went on YouTube, and that's how he resigned. So you have to admire him for doing that. Now millions of people get to see his resignation. And he said, the reason, rather than creating lifelong learners, our new goal is to create good test takers. Rather than being the recipients of a rewarding and enjoyable educational experience, our students are now experiencing a confining and demeaning education on the misguided notions of educrats. He said, I'd rather quit my $70,000 a year job to become a private tutor rather than be part of a system that is diametrically opposed to everything I believe education should be. And so on YouTube he said, I've had it, I quit. So then you find out my other big thing that I am really opposed to. So I say it's education without representation, taxation without representation, and education by big corporations. And this is usually something that really catches the ears of the liberals because they don't like big corporations. We don't either when they're like this. Bill Gates is the person who gave $100 million towards the writing of Common Core, and he has since given $150 million to various groups to go on promoting it. Like Scholastic Inc., he gave like $4 million to. So they're the ones that put the little magazines into the schools. And he's given, I think, $2 million to the PTA, the National PTA, so they will promote Common Core. 80 different groups he has given millions of dollars to promote this. And why? You think, well, that wonderful, sweet Bill Gates, he's just so concerned about the education of our children. What will happen when every child has a computer? Do you think some of those might be Microsoft? And you think that maybe the Microsoft software, he has his hands in software of all the computers. So he's going to be making billions back. And then he has a partner, which is called the Pearson Foundation. They are the biggest publisher of all of the ebooks. And they're going to be making billions. They're expecting that the e-learning market is going to grow from what it used to be, 2.9 billion in 2010, up to 6.8 billion by 2015. And then most of our teachers will now become facilitators. They'll just be behind the scenes, making sure the children are all doing their programs all right with their computers. How many of us spent 4 to 5 years getting our college degrees to become a facilitator? In some of the states, I think it's Wisconsin, they already are trying to pass legislation that says that they can have people now working in the schools that don't need a teacher certificate. So of course then the salaries can be much less. Why would they need a certificate if they're just going to become a computer facilitator? Okay, I won't go into this either because it's a big issue. Oh, you made it! This is my wonderful friend Jennifer Delaney who stayed with the car and helped it get towed. So thank you, I'm so glad you're here. This sweet, wonderful man, did he bring you?
His wife and his daughter.
Oh, isn't that nice? And those are the kind of people that you have in this area. And we were just really thrilled to find 3 people stop and ask if they could help, and they seemed like really nice, trustworthy people like this kind of man. Well, I am relieved. I've been praying. This whole evening has kind of been a big bag of tension going on inside both of us. Anyway, I will skip this because this is a whole other aspect, but I just wanted you to know that when every classroom has a computer in it, every classroom will have Wi-Fi. And Wi-Fi, we're not being told anything about, but in New Zealand, they have banned Wi-Fi, as has Australia in their public schools, because they say the children's skulls are not developed enough to have this constant radiation bombarding them. And that's what Wi-Fi is, it's radiation. And we think it's absolutely wonderful, but we're not allowed to hear anything different about it. So I'll skip that. Okay, does digital learning improve education? Where they have tested this, the Western Michigan University, only 27.7 virtual schools met adequate yearly progress goals as compared to 50% of public schools. So constant learning with the computer really does not improve education. Children need teachers, and they need teachers that teach, and they need professors that profess, that don't just stand in the background and let the children construct their own meaning. They need teachers that give guidance and are willing to give guidance. We're also told that with Common Core, cursive writing will no longer be taught. In California, we were told, well, that could be maybe 15% that the teacher can use if she wants to. But, you know, in the assessment test, it'll be the keyboard that they use, and why have cursive writing? Cursive writing is what lets you read your wonderful letters from your grandparents. It lets you read ancient history. My husband is able to read this amazing, beautiful cursive text that was old German. I can't read it, but he can. But, you know, it's beautiful. And my sister just put together a book of the love letters between our grandparents that were all cursive writing. She wouldn't have been able to read them had she not been able to read this. And a teacher told me that in some instances they will have beta testing, which just recognizes the children's voice, and they can take their test without even knowing how to write or read. Maybe that's why they'll do it with so many of the illegals coming in that have not really learned English yet. This was a teacher from San Jose who called in on a radio program that I was on, and that's what she said. Children are being deliberately dumbed down so they will no longer be able to make wise decisions. America is into an illiterate nation. So that's what some people think is really behind this, and if you believe John Dewey and his socialist progressive education, illiteracy is one of their goals. They don't want us to be good, strong readers. So who really wrote Common Core? It was a national and international cartel. It consisted of members of the Council of Chief State School Officers, the National Governors Association, and a Chief Education Policy Group, part of the NGA. These groups sound official, but they're really not. They are NGOs, which stand for non-governmental organizations, and they are trade organizations. They're based in Washington, D.C. And just to let you know, they have the trademark on Common Core, and they have the copyright. And it is illegal for a governmental or a true government organization to have a copyright or a trademark. They also are not allowed to, or they're not able to have what is known as a Freedom of Information Act on them. So you don't have, and they were meeting behind closed doors. A true government organization cannot meet behind closed doors, and they are open to this. It's called a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request. We can't get any information on the background behind the scenes for them because they're not true governmental organizations. And yet they're saying, oh, well, it was the governors from the states that met with us, and it was the state superintendents at schools. That's how Common Core was created. Well, there's just a smattering. Not every governor belongs to the NGA, and not every state school board superintendent belongs to the NGA or the CCSSO. So they're just pretending to be government organizations, but if they really were, then we could have a FOIA request on them, and they would not have the copyright, and they would not have the trademark. So they were joined by the Obama administration and a progressive group called Achieve, and this Achieve is about as liberal and far left as you can go. And Achieve, they also had the FTA, the NEA, these labor unions, the College Board, and they had an international affiliation from Sir Michael Barber, a British subject, who is the founder of the U.S. Delivery Institute. It's actually called U.S. Education Delivery Institute. What gives the right for a British subject to go found a U.S. institute? And none of this makes sense. Then you have the amazing influence of this charming lady. This is Linda Darlene Hammond. How many of you have ever heard of her? She's really tried to keep her name hush-hush behind the scenes because her reputation precedes her. She is the education professor at Stanford, the author of many far-left progressive education books. Bill Ayers considers her his favorite education expert. Obama wanted her to become his Secretary of Education, but she was so far to the left the Democrats would not even vote for her. So that's how we ended up with Arne Duncan instead. She has been leading the consortium to write the assessment test for the Smarter Balance Consortium. They actually have two consortium that are part that are writing these assessment tests, and they're going to bring them all together. So one is called Smarter Balanced, and the other one is called Park. And she's been leading this behind the scenes. I actually have a book that if my suitcase were open, I would show you, but it shows, it acknowledges her. It's coming from the state legislature here in California. In the introduction, it says, "We would like to acknowledge Linda Darling Hammond, PhD professor, Stanford University, for her leadership in this consortium." So even though she's been behind the scenes trying to let no one know that she's there doing this book lets the cat out of the bag. So, and then what gives her the right to do this? Her own charter school called New Schools actually failed after 5 years at Stanford. They let this little charter school be created to try to help lower class children. Her charter school failed after 5 years with only 16% proficiency in English and math. But as a true progressive, maybe that was an achievement if you want to bring down literacy. So what will the assessment test be like? How many of you remember the class test from 20 years ago? The class test stood for California Learning Assessment System. It was only in place for 1 year. Many parents began to refuse to allow their children to take it. I was one of those parents because we discovered this was not assessing anything the children already knew, no factual knowledge. It was assessing their attitudes. They would have to read shocking stories that kind of shook them out of their traditional paradigm. And some of the little children were crying, reading these stories, and then trying to answer the questions going along with them. I'll just give you one example. There was a wife who finds out that her husband has been killed in a train accident. She goes into her bedroom to mourn for him, and as she's seated there, these new thoughts come to her mind. Maybe this will not be so bad after all. I will be free of his tyrannical reign over me. And then as her sister comes to greet her, and they're walking down the stairs together, the door opens, and her husband walks in. He was not on that train after all. Well, with her new way of thinking, she is not happy to see him. She has a heart attack and dies. Isn't that a lovely story? And I've heard this story is still out there. A boy in high school told me he recently read this story, so I guess this is now part of classical English literature, I don't know. But anyway, then the little child has to answer on the test with these leading questions. How does this wife feel about marriage? How do you feel about marriage? Does marriage bring freedom or does it take away freedom? And you know, if a child comes from a nice, happily married family, he's probably really distraught over this. And how do you answer that? And there were other stories like the famous lifeboat story, where a shipwreck happens and 9 people survive, but the lifeboat can only hold 8. So the little child has to determine who has to jump overboard and die. And so the different scenarios are given. One is a mother with a child, one is a teacher, one is a medical doctor, but one is an elderly man who has already lived his life. So of course the child is supposed to choose him, and that's teaching the child euthanasia. If the child tries to say something creative, like, well, they can all take turns, one can swim for a while and then get back in, that was marked down. That was not the answer they wanted. Well, because back 20 years ago, this was not done with computers, it was very hard to grade. 6 million children being graded by just people reading the essays. Yeah. So what they did, they chose 3 tests per school district as a representation of the entire district. And how unfair and arbitrary that was. And when the school districts found out, they refused to give the test from then on. And finally, in 2005, Pete Wilson threw the test out. Well, that was 20 years ago. Reading what I've read about the assessment test coming up, I've heard it's going to be similar. They're going to be reading stories. They're going to have open-ended questions. And with open-ended questions, that's how attitudes can be changed. But is there anyone in here who's a salesperson? Salespeople are taught how to give their clients open-ended questions. that, kind of leads them in the direction you want to go. Well, that's how the class test was, and I'm afraid that's how the assessment test is going to be. But when it's entirely for all of our nation, how do you throw it out? We threw it out because it was just here in California. That's what is so scary about the difference between the assessment test and the class test. So as I'm told, the SAT, ACT, GED are all going to be aligned to Common Core. This is what David Coleman said. He's the chief architect of it was actually the language arts part of Common Core, and this is what he said. And then what is so interesting, Pearson, the foremost publishing company, they are in partnership with the American Council on Education. Together they will be aligning the GED to the Common Core standards. How will this affect homeschoolers? They will be taught by their parents at home, wonderful traditional education, but if they go to take the test to enter college, they'll probably fail because the tests are now geared to Common Core. So they'll either have to be taught this strange Common Core way, or maybe they won't go on to college anymore. So it's definitely going to have an effect on everyone. The Catholic schools have already geared their schools to Common Core, and I'm afraid probably so many of our private Christian schools are going to do the same because they're being told, well, this is what the future is going to be. The colleges are all going to be aligned with Common Core, so you either learn it or your children won't do well. And of course, they're only being taught these nice, positive, rosy things that so many of our teachers are being taught and our school board trustees. This is a picture of Bill and Melinda Gates, and this is really the huge backer behind Common Core. And as I mentioned, he gave $100 million. He's also giving $150 million to promoting it here in the United States and more money promoting it worldwide. And Common Core is worldwide. This is the plan for the entire world. So you will not only have commonality from going from California to Arizona, if you go from California to Germany, your children will not miss a single day. This will be the same curriculum. How easy that will be because everything is with computers. This is the Pearson Foundation logo. And just to give them more background on them, they are the world's leading learning company. They have taken over 100 other education publishing companies. They just let them keep their own names, so you have no idea who they are. They have also taken over most of the nonfiction and fiction books throughout the world. They just let them keep their own name too. How many of you have heard of Penguin Books? Penguin is a pseudonym for Pearson. So that shows how powerful they are. They have offices in 70 countries with 36,000 employees. And I'll now show you the picture of the man that is promoting them. This is Sir Michael Barber. He's, as I mentioned, is the one that was part of the group that was creating Common Core here in our nation. He is a British subject. And as you see, he is so far left-leaning, he's leaning left in the picture. And he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth for his education reform in England. But what was so interesting is, as soon as that education reform took place, England's literacy scores went down in international testing. They were 7%, they went down to 17%. So if that's the progressive goal to lower literacy, he achieved that. He wrote the book called Deliveryology 101, and in that he says that there should be no more sovereign countries, no more barriers. He also believes that our children are to be part of world citizenship. And then he believes that Common Core is there to change attitudes, just like Agenda 21, and he totally believes in Agenda 21. And this is the logo of Agenda 21. How many of you are familiar with that? You were wonderful, so we won't go into that. But that's what Common Core is teaching throughout the world. I Googled sustainable development, Common Core, Africa popped up. Exact same wording, exact same everything. So this is a global plan. And this is how it is being, social justice is part of it. I already mentioned how that is in the textbooks. And Sandra Stotsky said that social justice essentially means leveling the playing field. Ignorance makes all people equal. And it also means taking from those who have and giving to those who have not, redistribution of wealth. Stanley Kurtz wrote a book called Spreading the Wealth, all about Obama's whole plan, and he had a whole chapter devoted to Common Core. He said that Common Core is a politicized curriculum that is promoting social justice. It's reducing disparate outcomes between students in different districts by undercutting standards, so it's going to bring them all down. And it is a redistribution of suburban education funding. So they're going to take the funding from the suburbs and give to the inner cities. And that, of course, what is that going to do to the suburbs? It'll slowly cause people to move away and have to move into the inner cities. And he says it's going to end the American dream as we know it. I won't do this, let's go on. This is Sir Barber's amazing formula. He believes that E times K plus T plus L is what is behind all of this, and K stands for knowledge plus thinking plus leadership, and E stands for ethics, ethical underpinnings. You think, well, that's sweet, man, he believes in ethics. Not our kind of ethics. He's an atheist, and he believes that our children are now to be citizens of the world, so his kind of ethics is this earth oneness, even earth worship. And he's definitely pushing this everywhere. And he believes in sustainability, that every child should be taught these Agenda 21 tactics. And I mentioned what happened in England, so we'll skip that. This is a copy of his book, and this is being promoted in all those 70 nations because he is the Chief Education Officer for Pearson Foundation. So he's the one that is promoting Common Core worldwide. And this is his formula. He spoke before a British group last August and said, systemic innovation plus sameness of standards plus structure plus human capital equals a whole system revolution. So he speaks of our children as human capital. They are no longer individuals, little individually designed, wonderful children of God. They are human capital. And they're all going to be going through the same cookie cutter schools, coming out with sameness of standard, same structure, systemic innovation, and he believes this whole system revolution will never be able to be turned back. And that's his goal, and it's those who are with him in this. And then he's promoted by the Council of Councils, which is part of the Council on Foreign Relations. How many of you are familiar with them? In this book, which I brought just a few copies of, this is By Stealth and Deception. This was the book I wrote 2 years ago. Kind of gives my 20 years research project going back into the public schools and what I was finding out. I have a whole chapter on the Council on Foreign Relations and how they've been behind the scenes changing our nation into this socialist world government, kind of, that's their goal. And now they've spread out. They used to be just in the United States. Now they have Council on Council, so they're spreading out all over. And he spoke before them, thanked them for their support with Common Core. This is what it's all about, public-private partnerships. Another word for that is fascism. And Pearson Foundation and the Bill Gates Foundation formed a partnership. They are going into the schools around the world and changing them to charter schools, where they are now, and the heads of them, they're getting tax-paying dollars to support them from these different countries, and they're doing the same here. And then they have also formed a partnership to do all the teacher training for Common Core, or at least a large portion of it. So they're going to be raking in money every which way. How many of you have heard of C-Scope in Texas? If you listen to Glenn Beck's program, and I'll just briefly mention this because this is so important. I think C-Scope, even though Texas said no to Common Core, they had already accepted C-Scope back 2007. And this was under Rick Perry. The most egregious parts of it, the teachers had to sign a gag order that they could not talk about Common Core outside the school. They also, parents could not see the curriculum because They didn't want them to know what the children were being taught. The children didn't have to do homework because they didn't want the parents to see what was going on. And it was written by Linda Darling Hammond. Isn't that amazing? And another lady by the name of Lucy Calkins, who was just as progressive. They had constructivism, kids had to construct their own truths. The teachers were the facilitators in the background. The curriculum was liberal, anti-American, anti-Christian, pro-Islam, pro-green, pro-Agenda 21. Well, because of Glenn Beck, such a stink was made about this. In May, the state school board ruled there will be no more C-scope, and it was thrown out. However, Rick Perry immediately signed a new bill bringing in what is now called career and college readiness. That's just another name for Common Core. So I'm sorry to say, Texas, I'm afraid, is now on board with Common Core. And my daughter and my son just moved away from there. That's how I found out about C-Scope. They told me about it before Glenn Beck did. So I included that in my book because I thought this was so scary. And then you find out that Rick Perry is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. So in case you thought he was this wonderful conservative governor, he's kind of been behind the scenes, part of this group for a long time. There is hope. Well-known conservatives are speaking out against Common Core. If only this could have been brought up in the debate. This was what Mitt Romney said last September. He said he already knew about Common Core and he didn't like the fact that a big, powerful federal government could come in with their agenda and push it on our schools. But was that ever part of the debate? You never even heard the word education in the debate. It's just amazing. Other prominent voices. This is what Rick Perry said against Common Core. And I put that in my book, not knowing that he'd already accepted C-Scope. But, you know, it sounds really good what he's saying. It would be foolish and irresponsible to place our children's future in the hands of unelected bureaucrats, all thousands of miles away in Washington. Governor Koehle is trying to get Common Core out of South Carolina. The Virginia State Board refused to go along with it, saying this would lower their standards. They recognized it. One of the few that were willing to say no. And what is being done? What has already been done? Utahns against Common Core have been fighting so hard. They were able to finally get their state school board to no longer be willing to accept the assessment test. So they got them no longer part of the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, but they haven't gotten Common Core totally thrown out of their state yet, so they're still working on that. They got their very pro-Common Core superintendent to resign. The teacher strike last year in Chicago, remember that in September? We were told it was only because they were so greedy and wanted more money. Well, behind the scenes, there was only one commentator that I ever saw in the media that found this out. Her name was Amy Goodman. She's a liberal blogger and writer. She interviewed them and they said, the reason we had to say we wanted more money was because that was the only grounds upon which we could strike. But we really were striking to get rid of this horrible program that's coming into our schools that was in Chicago under Arnie Duncan when he was our superintendent. Back then it was called Renaissance 2010, but it was Common Core. And you have to admire them for trying to get the word out. It's just our major media. States that have similar bills pending, there's actually 20 states that have bills pending. Last year, there were 26 states that were not happy, but they couldn't get anything through. This year, we're hoping at least these 20 will get something finished. And in Congress, Senator Chuck Grassley has a letter to stop the funding of Common Core. So congressmen are finally finding out about Common Core because of people like you who are writing their congressmen and calling them. And then the marvelous Republican women throughout our state have passed resolutions against Common Core. A national federal Republican women's resolution against Common Core has been passed. So you have to admire our Republican women. So little by little the word is coming out. So what can we do? Become informed, take action, just like you were doing tonight. This was before we had our rally. We had a whole big rally May 10th in front of the Capitol building about Common Core. And it was exciting. After that, we then went in and lobbied, and we hit every single office, Democrat, Republican, we showed up. And then, but we haven't got a big response back from them because, you know, they're mostly all Democrats and they support Obama. But you can continue to do that. And the more we do it, the more they'll hopefully listen. Write letters to the editor of your newspaper. And if they won't print your letter, then do what we had to do in Santa Rosa. We rolled up information about Common Core and just became our own newspaper, delivered it on our neighbors' lawns, let them know about it. Join with other like-minded groups. There's strength in numbers. We would love you to join with us. We now have an organization called Californians United Against Common Core. We have 50 groups that have joined with us, and we'd love for you to as well. Then when we send these letters to our state legislators, we have a list of all 50 names, and they can let them know that we are in large numbers. And these are Tea Party groups, they're Republican women groups, they're a variety. We have one Democrat group, that's Rosa Corey. I don't know if you've had her come and speak for you, but
She's Agenda 21, right?
yes, she's a real authority on that. But wherever she speaks now, she talks about Common Core, that this is how they're promoting Agenda 21. And speak out at events, petition drive. If you go to our website, you can actually sign a petition that we're gathering signatures on. We're going to turn that into our state legislators. So it's cuacc.org is the website. And then speak out at your local school board meetings because they need to know how you feel about this. And I keep telling them, 20 years ago, you threw out the class test, even though supposedly that was the law of the state of California. You still have the right, as our elected officials, to say no. And last January, I gave each of our 7 school board members over the Santa Rosa City Schools a copy of my book. And then, since then, I have spoken out at every school board meeting with a group of about 4 or 5. Jennifer is often there with me, and they have now been listening. And they're all liberal. We don't have a single Republican representative anywhere in Sonoma County. It's such a sad place. But our 7 school board members, the last 2 meetings with them, they began to parrot back some of the things that we've been telling them. So 4 of the 7 now are in agreement with us. They said they've been doing their own research. They're really concerned about the data collection. And I asked at the end of my 3-minute presentation, what are they going to do with this data? One of the school board members said, I would like to answer Mrs. Koehle's question. They're going to be using that data to determine what career our children will have someday. They're going to be selling that data to the highest bidder. Another school board member said that he had attended a national school board meeting for school board trustees, and he said it was about Common Core, and I've come back with a big question. If it's not as wonderful as they tell us, who do we hold accountable? Because Congress had no vote, and our state legislators had no vote. And then another one said, I am very concerned about Common Core because it is going to be taking away our local jurisdiction over our own schools. So we were just thrilled that they were saying these words that we've been telling them. We have groups all over California doing the same thing. In Long Beach, they have a huge amount of schools that they have to cover, and a group of 5 are going every single night to school board meetings and having little presentations. And if you go to cuacc.org, you can see scripts that you can actually download, so you don't have to write your own script. And then I have handouts for all of you that give talking points. You can use that. Just they're simple and you can expand on them. But let your school boards know that you trust them. They are your local representatives. They have your best interests at heart, not these big federal top-down people that are sneaking us in. And keep doing this, and eventually they will listen. If ours in Santa Rosa could listen, maybe yours can too as well. And then I would ask you to pray hard. Our Heavenly Father wants us to still protect these little precious children that He has given to us. He wants parents to still have the right to speak out on behalf of their children, and He wants teachers to have the freedom to teach what they know is right and best. So we need to keep asking for his help. And then don't be discouraged. How many of you have heard of Phyllis Schlafly? This is the organization that I represent. Back in the 1970s, the Equal Rights Amendment was going to be a done deal. There were only 3 states left that they needed to ratify it. Everyone thought, we just have to give up. There's no hope. She didn't give up. She kept speaking. They could never get those last 3 states, and 5 states that had already ratified the Equal Rights Amendment rescinded the ratification. The Supreme Court extended the time limit on it to try to help these feminists, which was illegal in itself, but they could never get, now they needed 8 states. They could never get those 8 states. So don't give up, even when you look like this is just, they say it's called a freight train running, there's no stopping it. You can, you just have to be dedicated and keep working. And my last slide. Oh, this is the summary of, again, what you should say. This is education without representation, taxation without representation, education by special interest groups and big corporations. It's a violation of our privacy rights, and it's really dumbing down the standards. I needed to have that one in there. And the school districts have the right to say no. Now the last slide. Okay, I started my own publishing company because this book was originally done by Pearson Publishing, and Pearson, well, it was done by Ex Libris, but Pearson has taken over Ex Libris, so I don't want anything to do with Pearson. So my publishing company, this is my little logo, and it's called the Small Helm Press. I love this scripture in James. Behold also the ships, which though they be so great, and are driven of fierce winds, yet are they turned about with a very small helm. So just as a small helm can turn about a great ship, you who are armed with knowledge and courage and truth and willing to speak out, you can also sometimes change the course of history. So that's my challenge to you, to try to do that, to be the light, to speak out and warn others of Common Core. Thank you so much. Can I take a few questions? Okay, I'm sorry that this was not as long as some have been, but it's probably the longest meeting you've ever been. Okay, back here.
I just have a question. Nowhere have we mentioned unions. And in California Union Students Liberation, we did mention that they were in the
Formation, yes.
formation. But if teachers are being told, the unions aren't backing this at all. They're not helping those people.
Well, California is kind of a unique state. Remember I told you that all of the states were offered, the governors were offered 3 things to bribe them. The bribe of the money and then the waiver to get them out of No Child Left Behind. California did not get that waiver because the unions were not willing to allow their teachers to be constantly assessed. And so they said no. So you have to admire some things about our unions. And then I actually have a friend who is really high up in the CTA. She tried to present a resolution against Common Core at their big CTA convention. That kind of went down in smoke, but she then did get the vice president to help her to come up with a resolution to at least take a really close look at the assessment test and weigh its costs. And so we're making progress. And I personally think, the unions, if they really realize what this total objective is, to have absolute total control and take over of all education, they will have no representation either, just like our school districts. So let's talk to our unions and let them know what is really behind this. Any other question? You've been a wonderful audience.
Make a comment. Back a ways, this registered for me. You were talking about if the children cannot pass the test, then they can't go to college. And Glenn Beck made a point in one of the shows that I watched that there's a university, I think it's in Utah, I'm not sure, that's not accredited. The students go there, the education is so high that the kids are still getting into, he said, I don't know why they want to, but like Harvard or whatever, but they're getting superior educations, and he said, forget about college and work and trying to gear your children toward that, because they can get their own education and do what they want with their life.
I think that's a really good point. Did you all hear her? I think that may become the day that we will be able to just educate our children at home, and especially if college education is going to be dumbed down, we can give them equivalency with, and I think it's maybe George Wythe University in Utah. There are a few that are like this, and of course there's Hillsdale College that refuses to take any government funding. There's St. John's back in New York that my nephew got his master's from. So there are still a few good colleges, and maybe the accreditation will not mean as much after a while when you realize all this, what's going on. Back here?
Well, we would just wonder if this would not be a piggyback on the data collection with everyone's outrage at the NSA of data collection, and how I think people of the backlash, I think is unexpected.
Yes.
So you think that this point at least could be piggyback for that, and starting people going, well, wow, I don't want you to listen to my phone calls or in my emails, I don't want you, watching my children.
And that's a good way to bring this in on some of the radio stations that just will not talk about Common Core. And I'm really sorry to say that's Fox News. Fox News is owned and operated by Rupert Murdoch, and he has given lots of money to Common Core. So that's why you never hear Rush Limbaugh, Mark Levin, Sean Hannity, or Huckabee mention Common Core. And I've called in on those stations and have tried to be able to say something about it, and I'm always told, oh, well, they're not talking about education anymore. But if you can bring it in under the NSA data collection, that's how I did in San Francisco, KSFO radio. I got it snuck in just that much. You got to try something, because these stations, above all, should be talking about this.
Bill Bennett has a program in the morning, 3-hour talk show, conservative, and he's into education. I think he was head of Department of Education under maybe Ray.
Yes.
Does he talk about it?
No. So call in on his show. Do whatever you can do. We've got to get the word out about this. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment about the precious resource teachers are. We had, when I was growing up, a while back, I took my mom to the Emerald Hospital, and one of the volunteers looked really familiar to me. Finally, I thought I had to figure out. I walked up to her and I said, by any chance did you teach elementary school at Rosedale Elementary School? And she said, I did. I said, 3rd grade, and she said, little Danny Kelly. I looked at my mom and I thought, you're so awesome. I mean, that's just awesome.
Isn't that amazing? She remembered your name.
No. If she knew what was going to happen, she definitely did not. Anyhow, I just thought that was kind of a cool thing.
Well, I think all of us have probably been influenced by some outstanding great teacher in our lives, or many teachers. And what's so sad is that teachers just won't have that opportunity anymore. They're not supposed to stand in front of the classroom and teach. They're not supposed to stand in front of their college classroom and profess. They're just supposed to be little facilitators. And that newspaper article that came out today, that's exactly what that teacher said. My job is to be in the background and let them construct their own meaning, supposedly. Back here?
Yeah, I think that also we should recognize that the threat is not only external, but by looking at this crowd tonight, it screams out to me that it's internal. If you look at this crowd, how many of us here still have children in school? There's probably not very many. And the people that should be here listening to your wonderful presentation are the people, kids in school, hearing what's going on, and they're sitting on their behinds at home on the couch watching
Or playing video
watching
games.
some sitcom. So I find that very disturbing and very
It is very disturbing. Would you mind getting on? It's right here. Just remembered, I have books.
So I got this, something on Facebook, and I don't remember who sent it to me. It may have been through the Blaze, because I have Glenn Beck as a friend on Facebook. Anyway, it's this master teacher teaching the teachers about Common Core, and she's talking about the math, and she said this, she said, now, we don't care so much about the answer, but how they came to that answer. So if they say 3 times 3 is 10, well, I'll correct them and tell them it's 9, but I'm more concerned about if they can show me the process, that they don't think in math. And then I was telling, I think it was Mary, and she said, have them do that on their tax return.
I'm so glad you brought that up. My daughter-in-law, who is the 3rd grade teacher in San Diego, was telling my son, who's a CPA, how she's supposed to teach this math, and it is like this. And I actually brought a little copy of something that I wanted to share with you, but she was telling my son what it was like, and then the children have to write an essay explaining to their Aunt Ruth what process they've just gone through. My son said, had I had to do math like that, I would have hated it. He's not a writer, but he's a very gifted mathematician, and he's a fantastic CPA. He probably would never have ended up as a CPA. So this is an example of traditional math versus the Common Core math. Over on this side, you see a number of 164 times 72. Traditional math, you carry the 1 and you multiply and you have an answer really quickly. Common Core math, you have to, it's called, there's a lattice method, and then there is a partial products method. The most confusing, wacky thing I've ever seen in my life. The partial products method, you have to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps before you finally get the answer. But that's what they have to do, and it's exactly correct. The children, if they go home and have their parents help them with traditional math, they have the right answer, they'll be marked down because they don't want the right answer, they want the right process.
The process.
And if you Google Common Core math, you'll see some of these amazing little YouTube clips where a teacher is teaching various children what this is like. One is a young man, and his is the most amazing. He says, right at the beginning, I think they were in middle school, they're supposed to be doing 2.42, you're supposed to decide how many fractions will divide into that or something, and he says, now I want you to know there is no one correct answer, but we just want to have you all come out with your various meanings, and then you have to explain them, and this is math by consensus.
Oh, no.
Is that amazing? So then they were divided into little groups of 2 when they work on their problem, give their presentation, then they're divided into another group of 2. So you spend the entire period on one problem. And you could see the kids were not enjoying it. You could see they were confused. And anyway, I will pass this around briefly so you can see what that looks like. And I'm sorry, I meant to have a whole bench to hand out to you. Any other questions?
I remember one of your slides, there was a statement that some teachers were being forced to use these standards under penalty of possibly losing their jobs.
That's what my daughter-in-law told me.
Can you explain who does that enforcing and how that comes about?
I think it was mainly just to frighten them, but it probably, even though she is an absolutely brilliant, competent teacher, gets high ratings, every spring she and all of her fellow teachers get a pink slip. That's been going on for about 3 years, even though they have their permanent status, they've been tenured, and it's not until maybe late July that she finds out she still has a job. But it's just not the same kind of teaching that tenure doesn't mean very much anymore. I don't know, she didn't tell me who told her that. Maybe it was the rumor that the teachers were passing around because they'd been told that by, someone had been told that by the administration.
Just came down.
Yes.
Not much of an explanation.
No. But it makes them all very cautious and afraid, and they're afraid to speak out against it, and so maybe they're getting points on their evaluation, those who are enthusiastically accepting new ideas and are good team players, and if they say no to Common Core, they're afraid they will be rated as a bad team player.
I
Mary?
think this will discourage people from going into the teaching profession, just like with Obamacare. A lot of people won't be going into the medical profession, so if you have a shortage of teachers, then what will they use?
Well, because facilitators, you could have 60 students in a classroom doing all their computer work with one teacher.
One of the teacher doesn't have to be credentialed.
And if the teacher doesn't have to be credentialed, then you don't have to pay them as much. I think that is probably
And then you're
part
gonna have a
of
much worse environment in your classroom because the kids are, I mean,
18,000 for one.
think of
This,
this problem.
this one slide, the one slide I didn't go into, but I was teaching in a computer classroom as a substitute teacher. And I was told to just have the kids all turn on their computers, and I was supposed to go around and check them. Within 5 seconds, I heard this titillating laughter coming from a corner of the room. So I went over there. A little boy in the 7th grade had already accessed pornography, just like that, in 5 seconds. And this was a school that was supposed to be screened against any of that. These kids are so sharp and shrewd. They know how to go around these things. So in a classroom of 60 students with one facilitator, you know, how much of that could be going on?
That's only one example. I
Or
just
they
thought
could be playing
behavioral
video
was-
games, or,
But, yeah.
and that's probably why that study that was done at Michigan, they were not as high rated as the students that come from real life classrooms where they have a teacher and interact. Anyway, it is a very amazing program, and the fact that we've actually gone this far with it is very scary, but we can't give up. So thank you so much for being here and allowing me to speak and having the patience to... And there are books over here.
I know you're not.